1818, there was a great deal of excitement in the city of London because a consignment of ancient statues and various fragments was going to be arriving in London from Egypt. And one of the items in this collection was a very impressive statue of Ramses II, one of the great Egyptian pharaohs. You can see it in the British Museum today. Now, one man who was very interested in this coming consignment of things from Egypt was a young poet. He was fascinated because of the idea of the statue, that it represented somebody who had once had incredible power and who now was reduced to a broken piece of stone. He decided, along with a friend of his, that it might be rather nice if each of them wrote a poem about the statue of a pharaoh. Now, the friend was a man called Horace Smith. Horace Smith was a better than average poet. He sat down and he wrote a poem about the statue that was due to arrive at the British Museum. His poem can be found on the web, and it's a perfectly good piece of work. The other poet, however, sat down and wrote something that you can find in every anthology of great English poetry that is ever published, because that young poet's name was Percy Bysshe Shelley, and the poem was Ozymandias, first published on the 11th of January 1818 in a publication called The Examiner. Let me give you Ozymandias, which was the Greek name for the Egyptian Ramses II. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that it sculptor well those passions red which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, alone and level sands stretch far away." In the end, those statues and fragments only arrived at the British Museum in 1821, so some years after Shelley wrote that great poem. He never got to see that statue. But I think what he wanted to do in this poem was to examine power and the inevitable decline of power. Percy Bysshe Shelley was a total radical. He was a vegetarian, something which was considered decidedly strange in that era. He was an atheist. He had been expelled from the University of Oxford for publishing a pamphlet called The Necessity of Atheism. He was also totally against the army and the navy, the government and politicians, and, dangerously so, he was also very against the royal family. Shelley also believed in free love. As a young man, he eloped with a schoolgirl called Harriet. They went up to Scotland and they got married. Harriet had 2 children. But then Percy Bysshe Shelley fell in love with a young girl called Mary Godwin. He eloped with her. Eventually, poor Harriet committed suicide. She drowned in the Serpentine in London, and then Shelley was able to marry Mary Godwin. She, of course, became Mary Shelley, author of Frankenstein. Shelley continued to upset the authorities, to put into his poetry the many radical ideas with which his head was full. And really what he does in Ozymandias is look at this man who once was able to control millions of Egyptian slaves and the building of pyramids and other things, who had incredible power and incredible wealth to go with it. And he shows that this man who once said, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair," is now surrounded by desert and nothingness. And the statue representing him broken and cracked and far from whole. So it's a very powerful statement about what happens to people who perhaps get a bit too big for their own boots, who think that all that matters is their own position in society. There are a lot of lessons that we can all learn from Percy Bysshe Shelley's great poem, Ozymandias, today.